Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I got my friend Ernie Stevens back on the show. Welcome, brother.
Man, I'm glad to be back. I really am. Thank you. I had a blast last time.
Yeah, it was great having you on, Ernie. And I was going to give an intro, but I want you to give an intro because you obviously a law enforcement professional, many years. You've done some great things, and you continue to do great things for the not only community but for our brave men and women. Can you tell the listener, brother, who is Ernie Stevens?
Oh, wow. Well, Ernie Stevens is a retired San Antonio police officer after 28 years. I worked everything from in normal, right, large capacity departments. You kind of bounce around a little bit until you find your niche. So I started out in patrol, became a field training officer. I was on the DWI task force, was on the gang unit. And then a course came through our department in 2003 that I got signed up for on my day off and sent to.
That always happens.
Called
Voluntold.
That's a whole episode in itself, how that crap happened. But it honestly changed my career path because it was a class on crisis intervention training, and that led to the development of a mental health unit, which San Antonio never had.
You founded. I mean, you're the one that was spearheaded that, right?
I wasn't going to take no for an answer, man. And they said no a lot. So there's a story behind what happened there. There was a film made. I retired in January of 2021, went to work for the Southwest Texas Regional Advisory Council, which kind of falls under the the Department of Emergency Management in Texas. So we oversaw any type of emergency management in 22 counties, and they brought me on to build sustainable mental health teams, co-responder teams between law enforcement, local mental health authorities to provide an alternative response. And then just in August, I came over as the deputy division director for the Council of State Governments of Law Enforcement. So now I've got a huge reach of all 50 states, of any law enforcement agency that's looking to partner with the Bureau of Justice Assistance for grant funding to build these types of sustainable mental health co-responder units to provide an alternative response for people that call for a mental health crisis.
Yeah. And thank you for all your work, brother. Thank you for your service. And, you and I, we started a long time ago in this career, and it's always amazing to me how it just kind of progressed throughout the years, where we would get, you were in a much larger agency, but you would get a couple calls for people in mental health crisis, maybe a week. Now it's like every day, officers are going to these types of calls. Do you see an end in sight? I mean, maybe that's kind of a dumb question, but do you think it's going to slow down, or you think it's just going to kind of go out on the track it is?
I think, wow, that's a good question. I've never been asked that. I don't see it's not going to go away, right? We can't just make bipolar disorder go away or depression go away. And people have had good reasons to be depressed over the last few years, right?
Absolutely.
This pandemic and just some of the horrific things that they've seen go on in this nation. People are confused, they're depressed, anxiety, a lot of anxiety, right? So it's not going to go away. So I think the best thing we can do in law enforcement is better equip our officers on how to respond to that, and understand that we cannot do this alone. It takes a village, right? So we really do need to partner with our stakeholders in the community to find out, what sort of services are truly available that we can bring to the community, and not just try to put a Band-Aid on these issues, because it really does come down to the back door, right? What happens once this patient gets ready to leave that facility after
Absolutely.
they've been,
that's
right?
when the real work begins.
Yeah, it is. And, we can only do so much from a 911 response at the front door, but it really does take continuity of care and wraparound services at the back door to get sustainable help.
Yeah. And there's always a question of funding, who's going to pay for it? And that's always the question, correct?
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because I believe in this world of balance, right? We had the pandemic come, which caused all these problems with the depression, the anxiety, and the uncertainty. But then with that, on the back side of that came all these American Rescue Plan dollars to cities and counties. And I know just where I live in Bexar County, there was a total influx of over $730 million in COVID relief money, and over $136 million of that was earmarked for mental health.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, San Antonio, Bexar County did a good job of saying, hey, we want to make this a priority and take care of our community. So counties and cities receive this type of funding that they have never seen before and will never probably see again. And it's interesting in what so many agencies and departments are doing with this money, because it's been extremely busy with departments calling to try to get some grant funding and build these types of approaches for an alternative type of response for community members.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, doing so many great things. You're an author, you're a speaker, you got a poster behind you, Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops, which is an award-winning show, an HBO documentary series that was on a while ago, but it's an amazing show. For the listener who's never seen it, you got to check it out. Ernie and Joe do an amazing job. How did that come to fruition, brother? I mean, how did that show start? I mean,
yeah. Okay. So in 2008, we finally got a mental health unit started in San Antonio. It was me and one other officer for 2 million people, right? We can do this. So with that development of a new unit came a little bit of local exposure, some news, some media. Well, that would trickle out to other networks. And we had a writer by the name of Ann Snyder come down and do a ride along. And she wrote an article for The Atlantic called Policing with Velvet Gloves, right? Pretty nice title. And she did a ride along and said, you know, these guys are like, well, they're cops, but they act like social workers. It's kind of weird. You got to, you know, they have a different approach, right?
Yeah.
Well, she knew a lady in Connecticut by the name of Jen McShane, who is a director and producer of Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops, and said, hey, you ought to go down to San Antonio and do a ride along with these two dummies. Like they're doing something different down there. So I get a phone call from Jen, and she goes, hey, I'm a filmmaker from Connecticut. I've got a lot of family in law enforcement, NYPD, and my friend, Ann Snyder. I'm like, yeah, I know Ann. She said I should come down and do a ride along. So I'm like, okay. So I tell my partner, Joe, I'm like, hey, Jen McShane, I just got off the phone with her. She's going to be coming down doing a ride along. Well, she shows up like no film crew, no sound crew. She pulls out her phone and like starts following us, and I'm like, "What in the world is this?" Right? But there's beauty to this, because she really just wanted to capture, without overreaching, what we did on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And after the very first call, she was like, "No, there's a story here." And I'm like, "Well, why did you decide that?" And it was a call that we went to involving a gentleman that lived at a group home that was having homicidal ideations. He wanted to stab and kill the group home manager. So we talked to him for a little bit in the front yard, let him smoke a cigarette, and said, hey, you know, based on these thoughts of wanting to hurt somebody else, you know, you got to admit, you know, that you probably need to talk to somebody and you know, kind of have a little bit of time to decompress. He's like, yeah. I said, all right, well, let's run over to the treatment center. I'll get you signed in and we'll get you rolling. And he's like, okay. And he looked at our car, and it's an unmarked car, but you can tell. Yeah. All right. Yeah. It's a Ford Explorer. And he's like, well, I'm not going to ride in the back of a police car. And I'm like, that's cool. You want to ride up front? He's like, yeah, I'll ride up front. I'm like, all right, I'll jump in the back. So as we're all getting in the car, Jen kind of grabs me by the arm and pulls me, because she'd been following us. And she pulls me by the arm and says, what are you doing? I said, we're going to go to a treatment facility and I'm going to talk to a counselor and get him signed in. She goes, no. You're letting him ride up front? I said, yeah. She goes, and you're going to ride behind the cage? I'm like, yeah. She goes, what happens if he attacks Joe? And I'm like, that's Joe's problem.
Yeah,
like,
Joe.
I'm totally
Joe can
safe.
take care of himself. Joe's arm.
I mean, we searched. I mean, we didn't have any weapons.
Yeah.
You know, we treat them with dignity and respect. Everybody we have, you know, we treat with dignity and respect. As a gentleman that was having some thought processes that were dangerous, you know, and admitted that he wanted to go to talk to somebody. So she goes, this would have never happened like up in the Northeast side. Like,
no, it was
handcuffs,
ask, tell, and take kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly, Patrick. So that's kind of how it started. And then 3 years of filming happened. It was, and during that time, you know, we had 3 suicides on the police department. So the film kind of took its own path, because without overreaching, Jen did not want to overstep. At first, she asked, hey, can I come to a roll call and see how y'all talk to these officers about it? And we're like, no way. Like, this is family.
Yeah.
No. And she was like, okay, that's fine. I get it. But she really talked about the trauma that happens to the officers on the job, which was not really what the film was supposed to be about. It was about this alternative approach to community members But that camera then turned inward behind the badge and said, hey, these officers go through a very difficult time, and this is why. So they started to highlight Joe's life and kind of what he was going through at home. He was going through a divorce and child support and dealing with his own PTSD. And then they showed, all the things going on in my life as well. So
Sure.
the film won an Emmy award, and got nominated for 2, won 1, and we were in the running for a Grammy for a little while until we got booted out. But the film did extremely
Yeah.
good, and it's
It's
still
amazing.
used. Yeah, it's been seen by over I want to say over 80,000 different it was either agency or officer, I don't know. You get these numbers and they all
Yeah.
just start scrambling in your mind. But police departments around the nation have been using this really to
Oh,
bring
yeah.
awareness, not only to their own agency, but to what type of approach we can do better to the community.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. I mean, I remember watching one episode where you and your partner had this guy in court, and he wouldn't leave the court. I mean, there's so many episodes. I don't know if you know which one I'm talking about, but you guys, that's what I love about it. But you took, I mean, without compromising officer safety, because that's the first thing. What officer safety? No, you guys are you have your tactics in mind, but you're treating people with respect. And I remember watching this episode. Most people just want to be heard, right? I mean, they just want to be heard. They want an outlet, and you guys take time to just listen to people and convince people, for the most part, to get some treatment, because that's really what it matters. Does that mean no force is ever going to be used? Absolutely not. But I just love your approach. And it's a lot different from when I mentioned ask, tell, and take. I don't know what you guys called it when you were coming up, but yeah, I'm going to ask you once, I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to take you.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the model that I grew up most of my law enforcement career. It just doesn't work that way anymore. In certain circumstances, maybe, but most of the time you can de-escalate. We have time on our side, so I'd rather talk a person into a pair of handcuffs and going, compliantly than do the other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, what the interesting part about that scene in the movie, and you're right, it took place in a courtroom. He just kind of wandered in there.
Yeah, he just wandered in there.
Yeah, and the judge, everybody's looking around, like, who is this guy? And he's very paranoid that people are
Yeah.
after him, and he
Yeah.
hasn't slept in days, which we recognize as one of two things, or the two combining into one, which is a drug-induced psychosis,
Sure.
or just strictly mental health psychosis. So, talking to him and letting him feel safe was one thing. Like you said, they want to be heard, but you know what else, Patrick? They want to be loved.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
I can say probably fairly confidently that if you're live in the United States and with a mental illness and you've ever had any kind of contact with the police, there's a possibility it's been in some type of negative fashion. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm not going to stick my head in the sand and say that does not happen. So knowing that and understanding more about what true mental health challenges are, you learn to take on a different type of approach, and you really try to make that connection instead of worrying about the correction of the issue, what's going on, by focusing on the person and not the problem. And that's how
Absolutely.
you create rapport and empathy and connection, right? So yeah, very interesting scene. I'm glad you brought that up, because that one we catch a lot of crap from about, hey, you sat down, like that's
Oh,
not tactically safe.
okay.
Yeah, I know, I get
Oh,
it. I get
okay,
it.
but you guys are cops. I mean, you guys are trained, and yeah, I don't get into the. I mean, there's always somebody out. Oh, tactics, and I'm not trying to downplay that. I get that, officer safety, but you're trying to help people too.
Right.
And the one thing that I didn't realize until I had my own struggles is I am much more empathetic to people, law enforcement or not, who are suffering now, because there's a lot of people. We were talking before we started. There's a lot of people out there. You mentioned the pandemic, all this other stuff going on, prices through the roof, inflation, you name it, and
Sure.
it's hitting people at every different direction. And a lot of people are just feeling helpless, and they're developing these mental health challenges. And I'm just much more empathetic to people now who are struggling, having been there myself. So
Yeah, for your listeners, although police departments and agencies are trying to build better approaches to the community that call in with mental health crises, we are very fortunate that on July 16th, 988 came online and rolled out nationwide as the 3-digit helpline, crisis line, suicide hotline, whatever you want to call it. But it gave people an option other than 911, because not everybody that calls 911 needs a police officer to show
Sure.
up, right? And when they do show up, who knows what the outcome could possibly be, right? It could be very good to very bad. But I'm glad to see that there's been enough priority and emphasis placed on people's well-being in the community that the federal government would step up, have the states own and take responsibility for the 988 call center, and give people an alternative
Sure.
to 911. So that's just rolled out. It's got a lot of fine tuning to go through, but give it some time, and we're going to work it out and at a national level, and hopefully that becomes a number that's utilized and helps a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the hardest thing is Joe, and probably listeners, is getting people. They're so conditioned to call 911 for everything, everything. There's a squirrel in my yard. Call 911. And so it'll be hard. But I agree with you. There'll be a shift, hopefully, to 988, and people won't utilize 911 for everything. Because I think there's. People think, well, once the cops show up, somebody's in trouble, and that's not the case. I mean, a lot of times, half the stuff I went to was non-criminal in nature. It was helping people in crisis. It was civil stuff. So it's good to see that the federal government is stepping up. And now we have that resources.
You said something interesting, right? Over the half the calls you went to were civil stuff, right?
Yeah.
I wish they'd put that in the recruiting pamphlets for police departments, right? Instead, they show them coming and rappelling out of a helicopter.
A Bearcat, SWAT
team. Yeah. And they're really, what kind of message are you sending to those that you're trying to recruit? Like, where's the picture of an officer with his arm around another officer with the caption of, "Hey, we're going to get through this together"?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
That's the reality of this job. It really, truly is. Like, that's the 1% in the recruiting pamphlets. What you see is what those officers do. The true reality is, like you said, we're responding to a lot of civil types of disturbances where people just have lost their ability to cope in a situation, and just need somebody to come in and help kind of stabilize it and calm the situation down. And sometimes less is more, and good training and understanding of procedural justice and crisis intervention. You can bring that approach to people where they won't be scared. And we have to build the gap that has been caused here over the last few years between law enforcement and community. We got to build that trust back. And I think in the way that we respond and approach in a different alternative way will help do that over time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much training out there, Ernie, with their CIT and other things for officers to have. I remember going through CIT years ago, and it was good training, and that's crisis intervention training. Doesn't make you a therapist, but it kind of brings awareness and gives you some training on how to talk to people in crisis and how to deal with those types of situations. Again, it's not the catch-all, but it was good to see departments, and there's other training out there, but I went through that. It's good to see departments adopting those types of training, modalities for their officers, because the reality is, like you said, it's not getting any better, unfortunately. We're going to more and more of these calls, and not only is the community impacted by it, but internally the officers are struggling too.
And in turns, they take it home.
Yeah, they take it home
to their families, right? And then before you know it, we wonder why the suicide rate is so high in law enforcement, or the divorce rate is so high, or it just seems like it continues on. And what I loved about crisis intervention training as being one of the instructors was, because it was hard for me to buy into it when I was sent to the training, right? I didn't want to go. But after hearing a family member tell her story, and there's power in story, right? That's why your podcast do so well.
Sure.
Is because I heard her tell her story about her son, and it really drew me in. And I was like, man, I got to do something to help this lady, but she's not alone. And that's really what changed my career path into mental health. But for the officers, what I found, Patrick, were the ones that were giving us the most pushback were the ones that in some factor were affected personally with something to do with mental health, whether it was a member of their family, a friend, a negative outcome that they had maybe while on duty, like something happened personally where they're like, I don't even want to hear about it. I want to talk about it. But by the end of the week, they're like, oh, I didn't know about all this. I didn't know about these resources. I didn't know that PTSD could take time before it can be, triggered. Like, I didn't know all these things. And they became our biggest advocates. And I can remember being at a soccer game watching some of my buddies play, and one of the wives of one of the officers walked up and said, "Hey, what'd you do to my husband?" And I'm like, "I'm sorry, like I don't know what you're talking about." She goes, "Yeah, number whatever out there." I'm like, "Oh, so and so." She goes, "Yeah, like he went to a class you taught. He was telling me about it when you came walking up, that you taught this mental health class or something." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." She goes, "Like we have conversations now.
Yeah,
He'll listen to me. He connects with me so much better." And I'm like, "Wow, well, that's really great to hear, because the true essence really is, it is de-escalation. But how do you get to de-escalation? By actively listening to somebody else and
absolutely.
trying to be empathetic to what the situation is."
Absolutely. And we, as you know, Ernie, I mean, we have a hard time in this profession coming forward as officers, men and women, coming forward saying, look, I have a problem. I think the stat I saw a couple of weeks ago, 39% of first responders in this country suffer from mental health addiction or both. And that's the number we know about. So the number is probably pretty high, much higher than that. Why is it, I mean, in your opinion, you got your finger on the pulse, you're all over the place, you're talking to cops everywhere. Why is it so hard? Is it a cultural thing within departments that officers don't come forward?
I think,
They're
Patrick, I'm gonna have to point the finger here, and I have to point it at leadership.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, you know, you can check the box and say, "Well, hey guys, we have an EAP program. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we have a peer support program. We're providing things for you." But if they don't feel safe coming forward to use those resources, what good are they? Right?
Absolutely.
Ask officers, do a random poll. Do you feel confident that if you went to your chief, your lieutenant, whoever, and said, "Hey, I am really struggling right now with depression. I've actually had thoughts of suicide. I need some help." Do you think they would honestly feel safe? Like
Yeah,
that,
I would say
that's what's
probably
frustrating.
a lot of them wouldn't, which is shocking to me in this day and age that we live in now, where officer wellness, health and wellness is, it's pretty well known now. But it would surprise me, or wouldn't surprise me if most departments are still have that, archaic mentality is okay, just get back on the street, do your paperwork, get back on the
Yeah,
street, which surprised me, Ernie. I mean, people aren't flocking to law enforcement anymore. So why aren't we taking better care of our most important asset? And that's the human asset. Those are
right.
our men and women who serve,
Yeah, I mean,
you know?
and it's cliche that healthy officers make for healthy communities, but there are some really good leaders out there that have
Mhm.
taken steps and taken strides, and I'll name drop Neil Gang out of
Yeah,
Pinole,
I was going to say
California.
Neil Gang, Pinole, California, doing
There you go.
amazing work.
Yeah, with the Asher model. I mean,
Asher
he's got
model.
the 7 pillar approach to building a culture of wellness. Like that should be a national model for law enforcement agencies. Like, look what he's done. Look how his officers, they don't leave. They stay there. They're healthy. They're happy. They feel safe to say, "I'm not okay." And their department says, "And it's okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. And we're going to walk through you, and we're going to be with you from rookie to retirement, like all the way through. We're going to help you with financial wellness." Just so many resources that he gives to his officers to show that, hey, we are invested in you, like you said, human capital, right? We're invested in you, and we care about not just you, but your family and the success of your family and your children. And that's what it comes down to. We're so good at helping people in the community, but we're not so good at helping ourselves
No,
internally.
no, absolutely not. And again, I talk to a lot of cops, you do too. And the hardest thing is getting them to kind of put their ego aside, and their biggest thing is their fear aside, of the unknown. But that's what you have to do. You have to take that step forward. I mean, it amazes me. I mean, cops do everything that most of the public can't do. They run into danger and everything else. But when it comes to their own mental health and well-being, they don't do that for the most part. And they linger in by themselves in silence with isolation. I know because I was there until I reached out and said, "Hey, I want to get better." But it's easier said than done. You know that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is the number one barrier is stigma, you know? Like I say, if I came to you and said, "Hey, Patrick, do you want to go bowling with me Tuesday night?" And you said, "Man, I'd love to, Ernie, but I've got to go see my therapist on Tuesday night." I should be like, "Hey, that's cool,
Yeah.
man. Maybe a night that you're not busy." Right? That
But
to me
now
should
it's
not
like, oh my God, a therapist. You're
right.
crazy. I mean,
But that shouldn't shock my conscience. This is why we have to normalize the conversation. I should be like, "Okay, cool. That's good that you're doing that. Good for you." And the last thing that needs to happen is I need to run back to roll call and be like, "Hey, guess what? I asked Patrick to go bowling, but he's got to see a therapist. Like, look out." Like, that's crap. That should not happen, but that is what happens. And we've got to break that stigma. We've got to come together, support each other, because this job affects everybody differently. You could see, we could be on the same call and it affects you differently than it affects me.
Absolutely.
Right. So why aren't we doing a better job of taking care of each other and quit acting like we're tough and wearing these masks when that's not our true representative self, and become
Absolutely.
vulnerable and authentic? And I think that's where the healing begins. And we
Yeah.
need the support from leadership.
And I tell people all the time, Ernie, I mean, when I'm talking to them, I'm like, look, I don't mean to sound like an ass when I'm telling this, but I tell them, look, your problems are not unique. They're unique to you and they're important to you. I'm not trying to mitigate that. But these are problems that other people, millions of other people have faced and they've overcome. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
okay, you're an alcoholic. That's horrible. You're going through PTS or whatever. That's horrible. But other people have walked your path and they've gotten better. You just got to take that step forward.
Yeah, everybody's trauma is different, right? So
Absolutely.
everybody's approach, everybody's treatment, everybody's support system will probably look a little different. But you got to feel safe to come forward with that. Of course, understand if there's misconduct,
That's
policy
different. That's
issues,
different.
that's
Yeah, that's
different.
different.
And you got to own that, and however that's going to be handled within your agency is fine. But if you truly are struggling because of something that was job related, you should be able to feel safe and come forward like anybody else would at almost any other job and say, hey, I need to decompress. I had something very traumatic happen in my life. I need some time off. And they always have that kind of support. Not so much in law enforcement. In fact, after that call, you need to hurry up, clear that call, and go to the next one.
Next call.
You do not have time to think about it or process it. And when I retired in January of 2021, I finally had time to start to process. Like, I didn't know how much I was carrying with
Yeah.
me until I just broke down crying one day in the shower. My wife's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't know why I feel like I'm feeling right now, but I'm extremely sad. I'm having thoughts of all these different calls I went to, and I'm remembering a story that a lady was telling me about when her father committed suicide. And like, this is all hitting me at once.
Yeah.
And it took some time to decompress and do some inward looking to find out, what do I need now to take care of me? And my wife's like, I'm glad you finally saw this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
families need to feel safe too. Families need to be able to say, hey, you are not yourself lately, and we need to get some help. Like, we've got to do a better job, Patrick.
Yeah.
And
And
stop
that's the
this
thing.
cycle.
I'm glad you mentioned families, because not only do the first responders, most of us suffer in some capacity or some way or shape or form, but it's also the spouses and the kids. And I think there's sometimes they're put on the back burner. Okay, they're over here. We're focused on the first responder, but we got to spend more time focusing on those support systems that support the first responder, i.e., spouse, partner, whatever you want to call it, children, because they're
Yeah.
often the ones that are scarred. I think of, back when I was a cop, how many things I missed in my kids because I was so wanting to do the overtime and all this other stuff. And the times I came back, I didn't want to talk about anything. I just needed to be alone for an hour. That affects people.
I mean,
That affects
yeah.
a spouse or a
You,
partner.
a few things on that. Man, you're all over this, right? Think how much time we spend polishing our boots before work, making sure our uniform is our name, like everything's got to be just right. We got to look good. How much time did I invest in my family that day to make sure, right, that I polished my wife, right, that I made her look and feel good? And
Yeah.
we get so caught up in how much we love this job in this community, we miss something very, very important. We miss the fact that this job can never love us back as much
Mhm.
as we love it. And I
Absolutely.
think as soon as we truly understand that, we can take a deep breath, push back a little bit, and say, I'm always going to go into my job and do it and do the best I can, but I'm not going to love it more than my family.
Yeah.
Right? I've got, because at the end of the day, that is your support system.
Yeah. The department's going to run, and I'm not trying to encourage people to go out there and quit. I'm just saying the department's going to survive without you when you're gone. They're going to have somebody to replace you, hopefully, and it's going to not miss a beat. Why aren't we talking about this more, Ernie, at the front end of somebody's career? Why aren't we talking more about this in academies on the state level, municipalities? When young officers or young cadets are in the academy, I understand there's post requirements, there's hours and all this other stuff. Why aren't we spending more time? Somebody like you come in and say, look, Ernie Stevens, he's been there, done that. He's doing great things. He's going to talk to you about mental health and keeping yourself mentally fit. On the beginning, it's always we're so reactive to everything, and I understand that's the nature of the job. But
Well,
why
think
aren't we
about
doing stuff at the beginning?
Well, think about what that. Remember when you went through the police academy, right? You got out, you got in
Yeah.
the car with your field training officer, and what did he tell you? Forget all that crap.
Yeah,
They
forget
taught
all that
you.
crap you learn. But I think we've come a long way as far as awareness and mental health among first responders. I
Yeah,
know what you're saying, because that's
no,
true.
yeah, we have, and I also always advocate. Like, why aren't we bringing the family members in at the beginning when you're either in the academy? Let them know what they're truly about, to get themselves involved in, the long hours, the extra jobs. It never ends. It
Yeah.
is a never ending cycle. And the families, they don't know really what to look for. They just know, hey, my loved one's not the same. Something's going on. He came home physically, or she came home physically, but they never came home mentally after
Yeah.
that shift.
Yeah.
Something happened. And what we have to keep in mind too, Patrick, is every night that I would go to work, like, my wife went on a ride along and didn't even know it, because when I would come home, bang, I would let it talk about it sometimes, talk about the filth I saw, the anger, the rage I saw, and then catch myself going, why am I putting her through this? Right. But it was like she was going on a ride along with me every night, because we would talk about
Yeah.
things. Not everybody does that, right? Some people come home and don't talk about it and completely disconnect. We had a little bit of a different type of relationship, which I don't know if that was the most healthy thing to do now that I look back at it.
Yeah. Yeah. But a spouse that can stay with you after being in this field for so long, I mean, that is a strong person. Because when I was divorced a couple of times, and a lot of it was due to, I'm not blaming anything, but me, obviously, it was due to me, but it was the career, and it just eats you up. And I tell people, you're gonna get damaged in this career mentally.
Yeah,
Hopefully not too bad physically, but it's going to damage you. It's not TV. We're not kicking indoors all the time, and everything's Hollywood, and it's not like that.
no, it's not. And like you said earlier, we really do need to set these officers up for success early on, because on average, they're going to see, according to statistics, about 188 traumatic events over a 20-year period, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the general public might see one or two
Yeah.
at most in a 20-year period. So what does that do to the mind over time? You really become desensitized to almost anything that would shock the conscience of anybody else.
Absolutely.
And that's dangerous. That's dangerous for yourself, and that's dangerous for your family and your friends. It's dangerous for the community that you serve, because people are calling for assistance, and you show up, you're like, really, you're calling for this? And you're so desensitized because you've done this so long. You're like, I can't believe y'all couldn't figure this, and it becomes just the disconnect again
Yeah.
between the community and
then
law enforcement.
and then there's disconnect, and then sometimes there's personnel issues and discipline issues, because you're just don't give a shit anymore. And I mean, one thing's, leads in to another. But so, I mean, you got to take care of yourself. And I know that's cliche, and you got to, but you do, you have to take care of yourself, not only physically, but mentally, and learn to come forward when you're, and there's so many resources out there, Ernie. I mean, there's resources at not only the general public's fingertips now, but especially law enforcement. There's so many great programs out there and resources that you can tap into.
Yeah, there are. I mean, there's apps. Some departments are providing the apps that officers
Mm-hmm.
can click on at 2 a.m. and make an appointment with a vetted therapist anonymously, right? I've seen one app that actually provides different types of resources. Let's say financial stability, marriage, counseling, how to stop smoking, whatever. And then at the end of the month, the company sends a report to the agency to say, hey, anonymously, 45% of the people that use this app this month clicked on financial wellness. So let's bring in a speaker, maybe at the next in-service training, to do a class about financial wellness and
Mm-hmm.
what these officers need to do, right? Because that causes all kind of stress in
Oh,
and of
yeah.
itself. So I love that the foresight to some of this technology is really trying to catch it based on what officers are, inputting on their apps to find out, like, where's the need for these resources. So there's good stuff up there. It's still, I think it comes down to, do I feel safe enough stepping forward and saying, I need something, I need some help, and I don't know where to go.
Yeah. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was to, actually, my ex-wife told me this, is you have to get friends outside of law enforcement, because most people are good people, but we get this kind of myopic view of the world. I know I was there, and I don't know if you were. I imagine at some point, everybody's a criminal. Everybody, if nobody has a badge or a star, you're a criminal. I don't trust you. And one of the best things Ernie and I ever did was make friends outside of law enforcement. And then I started to realize most people are good people. Yeah, it's that certain percentage we deal with on a day-to-day basis, but that really opened my eyes. And now that's not a dig on law enforcement. All right.
No, not at all.
No, I know not you, but for the listener. Oh, he hates. No, you love cops, but you got to get friends outside of the profession. That's kind of even you out, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the calls that police and the sheriff's department are responding to are 911 calls where people are in crisis, and you're seeing the worst part of, what society has, right? But those are the people calling in. What about all the people that don't call on a day-to-day basis, right? I had a huge support system through the church. I had a lot of friends that we go to church with that, when we get together, they're talking about their kids and school. And like, I don't have to bring up any stories to try to impress anybody, right? It's like, oh man, I get to sit here and actually listen to conversation.
Absolutely.
And hey, how do you smoke your brisket? Oh, I put mustard on it. What the hell? Like, really? Oh, it's a good
normal conversations.
Yeah. And I'm like, this is beautiful. We don't have to talk about that car that flipped over. Remember when that girl got it, it's good, and it's good for the family too. It's very healthy. So I'm glad you brought that point up.
Well, talk about new projects you got going on, brother. Unless you can't, I know you got books out there. You're always on the go. Anything else in the hopper, Ernie?
There's some things coming as soon as I get the thumbs up. Yeah, man. But good things are coming with the documentary. That information will be released shortly. The book, Mental Health and De-Escalation, I wrote with Nick Ruggiero. Yeah, that went #1 on Amazon. It was fantastic. Just did some international shipments out to Belgium, Canada.
That's awesome, bro.
That's doing good. And right now, I am really super loving my new job at the Council of State Governments. Like, this is giving me an opportunity to have this far reach into smaller agencies that just don't have access
and other resources.
So, they tap into the Bureau of Justice Assistance, they get the grant money, and then we go in there and give them technical assistance and get them set up for success through planning and implementation. So that's huge, because for me, Patrick, this was a dream of mine. After I went through the training in 2003, I was like, man, I want to see the police department get a mental health unit. And then in 2008, San Antonio got one, like 7th largest city. Yeah. We have 2 officers riding together. That's 1 mental health unit, but it's a start. And now we're seeing it across the nation.
Absolutely.
And I get to be a part of that. So
that's amazing.
That is fantastic.
It's very fulfilling. You still got your toe in the water of law enforcement. And I'm glad you brought up smaller agencies, because I think smaller agencies get lost in the shuffle sometimes. But what people don't, I know you know this, Ernie, but a lot of people don't realize that smaller agencies make up the bulk of law enforcement agencies in this country. Not every department's an LAPD or a Dallas or Houston or whatever. So I'm glad you're working a lot more with smaller agencies that might not have the resources, to go out there and get these types of programs.
Yeah, the average size of a police department in the United States is about 12 officers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, put that into context and then think, wow, could I even send an officer to a 40-hour training?
With the staffing and all this other
what's
stuff.
that going to be like? So, you see departments come together. You see them build these regional task force. You see them get innovative and use tablets that they can get on scene with, and then do an assessment, telepsych, with a provider, within their community. I've seen drones delivering medications on Indian reservations now. Like,
it's amazing.
This is fantastic. Some of the things we're seeing it's mind blowing.
Yeah. The good thing about technology, there's bad about technology, but that's the good part of it. So we're able to reach with technology and internet and, software and drones and all kinds of other stuff. We're able to reach people we normally couldn't reach. Back in the day when you and I started, because we're old.
And I will say this, one of the toughest ones are the Native American communities. I was out in Rio Doso, and I went and spoke at a conference there for 22 different tribal nations. And the Native American population is very underfunded when it comes to anything, right? Sovereign, don't even have internet services. So when you see communities come together and try to learn how to collaborate, whether it's a small community out in rural type of America, or you're looking at Native American communities, this is where the rubber meets the road. And we're reaching people we've never been able to reach before. So this is fantastic.
I love it, Ernie. If people want to reach out to you, brother, I know you're all over the internet. What's the easiest way? And everything will be linked up in the show notes. What's the easiest way to find you, brother?
LinkedIn usually is a pretty good contact. Twitter, eStevens0845 is my Twitter handle. You'll never guess what my badge number was, right? Please reach out, contact me, and let's continue this conversation. My heart really is, like you, Patrick, for officer wellness, resiliency.
Yeah.
Because we love what we do in law enforcement. We truly do. And I know the media can spin it sometimes and send the wrong message, but I would have given my life completely, for my community that I served if I needed to. I wouldn't have hesitated to. And I know many people can say that, but also needed to be well doing it. So
amen.
For the officers listening, please take care of yourselves. And for the family members, thank you for sticking next to us.
Yeah. Amen. And most people support law enforcement. You know that, Ernie. I mean, I tell people, turn off the media and get off. I mean, it's, some of us have to be on social media, but the majority of people out there, vast majority, support law enforcement.
Absolutely. And thank you to the community members. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. It all starts with them. Thank you, my brother. I appreciate it. God bless you. Thank you for your service. And I'm anxious to get you back on down the road to hear what great things you're doing.
Huge announcement, man. You'll be the first to know.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.